bill in the Enhancing Geothermal Production of Federal Lands Act in this hearing today. I have a letter of support for my draft legislation from the Geothermal Energy Association and ask unanimous consent that it be included in the record. Thank you. Idaho has a long history of using its geothermal resources. In fact, our State House in Boise is the only Capitol building in the entire country that is heated by geothermal. Additionally, the Idaho National Lab and its partner-led geothermal exploration and resource development at Raft River, Idaho in the early 70s, where they pioneered the concept of binary power cycles, which is now the worldwide industry standard to improve plant efficiency. Today, INL researchers are pioneering methods to develop the next generation of geothermal energy called enhanced geothermal systems. In addition to researching geothermal energy, Idaho is home to companies that are actively investing in geothermal. Obviously, one of these companies is U.S. Geothermal, which is headquartered in Boise and has projects in 4 states and the country of Guatemala. I am pleased that Scott Nichols from U.S. Geothermal is here today to testify on my bill. Mr. Nichols, when most people think of geothermal, they think about using geothermal resources to heat a home or a building. But geothermal resources also have the potential to be a major energy source. What is the potential for energy production from geothermal, in your opinion?
I'd hate to take anything away from the Department of Energy and the U.S. Geological Survey. There are thousands of megawatts of untapped geothermal potential in the western U.S. and across our country. Each megawatt that we produce it has the capability of heating about 1,000 homes. So thousands of megawatts and thousands of homes.
Thousands of homes. So if you 1,000 times 1,000, it's a lot of homes, right? How much of that potential is found on federal lands?
While we haven't looked at an exact number, and we can certainly get that information for you, it is a substantial number. Most of our geothermal resources are found on federal lands.
We often hear about the limitations that exist for other sources of renewable energy. Does geothermal have similar limitations?
Representative, when you think about limitations, I think about limitations in 3 ways, or maybe just 2 ways. Physical limitation in terms of its development capability, and I guess I would focus on the development capability of those limitations. Location, the distance to market, and we do experience those limitations. The closer those resources can be found to population centers, the lower the transmission costs, the more advantageous it is for us. What your bill really does is address the regulatory implications. I've said it before, I'd like to repeat, up to 7 different NEPA analyses that are conducted for any one geothermal development. Every geothermal well that we put in the ground is an exploration well, has already been reviewed at least twice under the National Environmental Policy Act. First, under the Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement that recognized this was a valuable geothermal resource potential area. The second was when the individual federal agency office reviewed the site-specific lands that were proposed for leasing and approved them and verified that they were suitable.
So I want to stop you right there. Ms. Anderson said that we should use the NEPA process because these are new developments that have not been explored. But you're saying that we will have already gone through 2 different NEPA processes. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're just asking for a small categorical exclusion, we're asking for that in this bill, that is very limited to very limited projects. And yet, I keep hearing from my friends on the left that they're concerned about climate change. They love geothermal, but yet they want to make it more difficult for us to use these resources, right?
We appreciate the language of the bill, and I wanted to point out, if it's okay, that even after that exclusion that we're discussing here, that we have this potential for this exclusion or categorical exclusion, even after that, we will go through at least 2 additional supplemental NEPA, 2 additional NEPA analyses before that energy is delivered to market.
So we spoke yesterday about your frustration with the length of time it takes to get approval for projects. How long does it currently take, and how long would it take if this legislation were enacted?
We, U.S. Geothermal acquired an approval for 5 exploration wells, less than 8 inches in diameter as those described for in this bill, and it took 9 months to obtain those that permit to do that. Under this bill, that time frame could be shortened from 30 to 60 days.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I'm going to ask each one of you, starting with you, Dr. Applegate. What was the one question you weren't asked, and what was the answer to that question? Starting with you.
Actually, I thought that this hearing represented quite an interesting set of explorations. I can certainly tell you the one I wasn't expecting in terms of thinking about talking about the offshore, but I appreciate your raising that. I think that there certainly are aspects of we explored aspects of the use of geologic mapping, the significance of volcanic and landslide hazards. I think maybe one line of questioning would simply be the relationship among these bills, and you know, I see the great state of Florida represented. You know, for example, issues related to subsidence. It's a landslide-related issue, but geologic mapping is the absolute crux of that. And we talked a little bit about the relationship among the topographic data, all of these different layers of information. So, I guess that's all I'd.
Ms. Bullock?
You have that's the hardest question, is when it's totally open for your interpretation.
But you have to understand from us, we very rarely get a chance for congeniality. No, and to have an esteemed panel in front of us, I mean, it's, you know, ask a scientist a question.
Well, so I guess, you know, we talked a lot about really specifically the role of maps to natural hazards, but I think I'd like a moment just to highlight that you have hazards, like when you're buying a house, for instance, you have hazards in your local neighborhood, and the power of the scale that we're talking about in geologic maps is really quite, it's more than just useful in terms of spotting big picture natural hazards. So when it comes to even buying a house, if you want to site your house correctly and make sure that your basement doesn't flood, you really need to have a great understanding about what the drainage in your neighborhood looks like. And a lot of that comes from, not from anyone here, but from the Soil Conservation Service. And there is partnership between the different departments on the cartography piece of this map making. And so it doesn't stop with just the USGS and the state geologists and everyone with their maps. It continues to it ripples through the federal government in terms of the quality and the use of the maps. So.
We're 2 for 2 with great questions. Mr. Nichols?
A lot of the questions this morning or this afternoon have focused on the categorical exclusion, and while that's very important, I think the question that wasn't asked related to co-production of geothermal resources in oil and gas wells. Number one. And
nice catch.
and should I hold off then? Okay. Co-production of geothermal with oil and gas wells, and number two, this non-competitive leasing of adjacent lands. And the question that really comes to mind is, how many additional acres would the Office of Natural Resource Revenue be able to be paid revenue on an annual basis if we had those two allowances? And I can't give you an exact number, they're estimates, but I can tell you just with our company, we would have paid over the last 10 years tens of thousands of dollars for the ability to have simply leased the land that is immediately next to the project that is producing electricity right now. But because we had to put it up for auction, or we would have been required to put it up for auction, we wouldn't lease it. We did not want to invite that level of competition or potential competition with our friends in the oil and gas industry. And I mean, we all see oil and gas wells. Look at the historical pictures of Los Angeles. I don't know exactly how many oil and gas wells are around this country producing thermal water that our improved technology will be able to generate electricity from. But if you can imagine each one of those wells with the capability to produce that geothermal energy is the equivalent of having an on-site emergency generator. It's a small power generating unit in somebody's back 20 acres that can be hooked into the grid and deliver power to that community. It's untapped, and there's nobody is incentivized to produce that power because the way the Energy Policy Act of 2005 was written. I'm sorry, yeah, Energy Policy Act 2005 was written. It did not anticipate those types of leasing activities. So I want to tell you, all three components of this bill, or the proposed bill, are critical, and we're committed to working with the Congressman's staff and others to bring this back with a number, I hope.
Well, it's exactly those kind of ideas that brought Mr. Tipton and myself to put the small hydropower aspect together, which passed and is making a difference now. Mr. Masterman?
Thanks. As Dr. Applegate said before the hearing, I'm the closer. So that's a good spot to be in. So a couple of things that often come up in these conversations that we have with various groups is who uses the information that you generate, and do you have any success stories from the mapping work that's been done? So, you know, geologic maps are used by just about anybody who does anything either on or with the earth that we live on. So, you know, road construction, obviously they're very interested in superficial geology, oil and gas exploration, mineral exploration, research into landslides and active faulting and volcanoes. All of those things use geologic maps. The groundwater industry is very keenly interested in understanding the geology, and all that information is provided by mapping. You know, geologic maps cross over into the soil science, so they overlap with the agricultural industry. So the agricultural industry is very interested in what the superficial geology is for the soils, for planting crops and feeding our nation. So they're also interested in the groundwater aspect of it too. So, you know, the uses of geologic maps are not just, you know, nerdy rock lickers, as some people like to call us, but they're very far-reaching and broad across the country. And as far as examples of success, there are many, but there's a couple that I just like to focus on in my state that I'm particularly aware of. We had a geologic mapping grant from the USGS for a state map grant in a mining district, and we went in there and did our geologic mapping, and there was a mining company exploring in there who had some difficulty in understanding what the gold mineralization was doing. And based on the work that our state survey had done that was funded by the USGS, we enlightened that mining company. They ended up discovering about 20 million ounces of gold based on the state map grant that we had gotten from the USGS. And then just last summer, we were out mapping in the western part of Cook Inlet, which is an oil and gas basin in south central Alaska. And the geologists located about a 100-foot thick section of oil-stained sandstones that was previously undocumented. And that, for our state, is a pretty substantial step forward in the understanding of the oil and gas potential of that basin. So there are, and you know, every state has their own success stories. And so if you were to go around the state geological surveys, you would get a remarkable collection of successful outcomes from the state map program. So.
Well, you satisfied the closer aspect, because we need sometimes